They called it the Proxima Incident. 7,000 human colonists, men, women, children, slaughtered in their sleep by the Zephyrian Empire's peacekeeping fleet. The galaxy watched the footage leak across the quantum networks. Burning homes, scattered toys, families that would never wake up again. The Galactic Council offered their thoughts and prayers. Trade sanctions, they said. Diplomatic protests. The usual dance of civilized beings who had forgotten what it meant to truly fight for survival. But Earth remembered. For 3 million years, humanity had clawed its way up from the caves, through ice ages and plagues, world wars, and near extinctions. They had earned their place among the stars, not through politics or pretty words, but through an unbreakable will to survive. The aliens were about to learn what their ancestors had discovered in the killing fields of Earth. When you corner a human, when you threaten their young, when you make them choose between submission and death, they don't choose submission. They choose war. And humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of making their enemies regret starting fights they couldn't finish. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the holographic display in the war room deep beneath Geneva, her weathered face illuminated by the red glow of tactical data streams. The images from Proxima Centauri B played on repeat, surveillance footage from the colony's final moments. She had watched it exactly 47 times in the past 12 hours, memorizing every detail, every face, every final scream that the audio pickups had captured before going silent forever. "Show me the Zephyrian fleet composition again," she commanded, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. The hologram shifted, displaying the alien warships that had performed what their commander called a cleansing operation. Sleek, crystalline vessels that looked more like works of art than instruments of death. Beautiful ships that had murdered children while they slept. 12 dreadnoughts, 48 cruisers, and approximately 200 smaller escort vessels, reported Colonel Martinez, the intelligence chief. His hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the data. Standard Zephyrian formation. They jumped in system, targeted civilian areas exclusively, and were gone within 6 hours. No military targets were engaged. Shin nodded grimly. The Zephyrians had been careful to avoid the small defensive platform orbiting the gas giant. They wanted no witnesses among the soldiers, no one who could fight back. Only civilians. Only families. And the Galactic Council's response? Martinez pulled up another display showing the ornate chamber where representatives of a dozen species debated humanity's fate. Ambassador Veltar of the hegemony has called for restraint. Says any human military response would be seen as an act of aggression against the peace accords. The Zephyrian delegate claims the colony was harboring terrorists. Terrorists. Chen's laugh was bitter as winter steel. 7-year-old terrorists. Grandmothers running daycare centers. Yes, I can see how they threatened the mighty Zephyrian Empire. The war room fell silent except for the hum of quantum processors analyzing every scrap of intelligence they could gather. Chen knew that across Earth's solar system, similar scenes were playing out. Fleet Admiral Harrison commanding the orbital defense platforms. General Thompson mobilizing the Marine Corps. Director Walsh activating every intelligence asset humanity had scattered across the galaxy. But they all waited for her decision. As supreme military commander of the Human Defense Forces, the choice was hers alone. "Ma'am," a voice called from across the room. Lieutenant Torres approached with a secure datapad. "Priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're demanding we attend an emergency session to discuss proportional response measures." Chun took the pad and read the flowery diplomatic language that essentially boiled down to a single message. "Sit down, shut up, and accept that your people are dead." The galaxy had its rules, its procedures, its carefully maintained balance of power. Humanity was still the newcomer, barely 300 years since first contact. They were expected to know their place. "Send a reply," Chun said, handing back the pad. "Tell them we'll be happy to discuss proportional responses. Right after we demonstrate what proportional means to a species that survived the predators of Earth." She turned back to the tactical display, where Earth's military assets were taking shape in her mind like pieces on a chessboard. The orbital shipyards around Luna, cranking out new vessels every day. The research stations on Mars, where scientists have been working on projects the galaxy's other species couldn't even imagine. The training facilities scattered across the outer colonies, where human soldiers learned to fight in every environment the universe could throw at them. Colonel Martinez, I want a full assessment of our fleet strength. Everything from battleships to transport vessels. And give me a direct line to Admiral Harrison. I want to know the status of the Nemesis project. Martinez's eyes widened. Ma'am, the Nemesis ships aren't scheduled for deployment for another 2 years. The weapon systems are still in testing phase. Testing phase is over, Chen interrupted. I want those ships battle-ready in 36 hours. If the engineering teams have to work around the clock, so be it. If they need additional resources, they get them. If they need miracles, they better start believing in them. The Nemesis project was humanity's answer to a galaxy that treated them like junior partners. While other species relied on energy shields and plasma weapons that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia, human engineers have been busy applying the one advantage their species possessed, the ability to think outside the box when survival was on the line. What about the political situation? Martinez asked. If we deploy military assets without council approval, the council had their chance to provide justice, Chun said. They chose politics instead. Now, they get to live with the consequences of that choice. She walked to the window overlooking Lake Geneva, though the view was just another hologram. The real war room was too deep for natural light to reach. But she could remember standing by this same lake as a child, feeding ducks with her grandmother while the old woman told stories about her great-grandfather who had fought in the last World War on Earth. The thing about humans, her grandmother had said, is that we're really quite reasonable. We'll try diplomacy, negotiation, compromise, right up until you hurt our children. Then you discover that all our civilization, all our art and culture and pretty speeches is just a thin layer over something much older and darker. Chen had been 7 then, about the same age as some of the children who died on Proxima. She hadn't understood what her grandmother meant at the time. Now she understood perfectly. Ma'am, Torres called out again. We're receiving emergency transmissions from our intelligence assets throughout Zephyrian space. They're reporting massive fleet movements. It looks like they're mobilizing for something big. Chun turned back to the tactical display as new data streams populated the hologram. Zephyrian ships were moving throughout their territory, but not in defensive formations. These were offensive deployments, task forces designed for rapid strikes against fixed targets. They're planning to hit more colonies, Martinez breathed. The Proxima attack wasn't an isolated incident. It was the opening move. Chen studied the patterns, her mind automatically calculating trajectories and timing. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with a typical galactic species, one that would file protests, appeal to the council, maybe impose some economic sanctions. They expected months of political theater while they systematically eliminated human colonies one by one. They were about to learn that they had picked the wrong species to play that game with. Open a channel to all fleet commanders, Chen ordered. Priority Alpha classification. I want every ship captain, every squadron leader, every platoon commander to receive the same message simultaneously. The communications officer nodded, his fingers dancing across the quantum relay controls. Channel open, ma'am. You're broadcasting to all human defense force units in real time. Chun straightened her uniform and looked directly into the recording sensor. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 million years of human evolution, of every ancestor who had refused to bow to predators, of every parent who had died protecting their children. This is Admiral Sarah Chun, Supreme Military Commander, Human Defense Forces. As of this moment, the Human Defense Forces are operating under War Protocol 7. All previous engagement restrictions are hereby suspended. All diplomatic constraints are void. We are now operating under only one rule: protect human lives by any means necessary. She paused, letting that sink into commanders scattered across dozens of star systems. The Zephyrian Empire has chosen to target our civilians. They have murdered our children while they slept. They have mistaken our peaceful nature for weakness, our diplomatic approach for cowardice. This mistake will cost them everything they hold dear. The data streams around her showed fleet positions shifting as her words reached distant commanders. Ships that had been patrolling trade routes suddenly changed course. Vessels that had been docked for maintenance were immediately recalled to active duty. Across human space, the machinery of war began to move. To our allies, we appreciate your support, but do not require it. To neutral parties, stay out of our way. To the Zephyrian Empire and their supporters, you wanted a war. You started one. Now you get to learn why humans are the apex predators of Earth. She gestured to cut the transmission, then turned to address her staff directly. Gentlemen and ladies, we have work to do. The Zephyrians think they understand warfare because they've fought against species that share their concept of civilized combat. They're about to discover that human concepts of warfare were forged in a much harsher crucible. Colonel Martinez cleared his throat. Ma'am, what are our strategic objectives? The Council will expect us to provide some kind of framework for the Council can expect whatever makes them comfortable, Chen interrupted. Our strategic objective is simple. Make it impossible for the Zephyrian Empire to threaten human civilians ever again. Whether that requires destroying their fleet, occupying their territory, or eliminating their government is entirely up to them. She walked back to the tactical display, where projections showed the various scenarios the quantum computers had been calculating. Every model showed the same result. If humanity fought by galactic rules, they would lose. Their technology was roughly equivalent to Zephyrian systems, their numbers smaller, their political influence minimal. But humans hadn't survived the African savanna by fighting fair. What the Zephyrians don't understand, Chen continued, is that they've just awakened something that has been sleeping for 3 centuries. Since first contact, we've been playing by galactic rules, trying to fit in, trying to be good citizens of this cosmic community. But underneath all that diplomatic politeness, we're still the species that hunted mammoths with stone spears and conquered a planet full of creatures bigger and stronger than we were. The door to the war room hissed open, admitting Fleet Admiral Harrison, still wearing his void suit from the emergency jump from Luna Orbital Station. His face was grim, but his eyes held the same cold fire that Chun felt burning in her chest. Sarah, he said without preamble, the Nemesis ships are moving to active status. We'll have 4 units ready for deployment within 18 hours, with full combat loads. The engineering teams are pulling miracles out of their backsides. And the new weapon systems? Harrison's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Let's just say the Zephyrians are about to discover that human creativity extends far beyond art and music. We've been preparing for this day since we first learned that not all galactic species are as peaceful as they pretend to be. Chen nodded. The Nemesis project had been conceived in secret, hidden from the Galactic Council and their never-ending oversight committees. While other species had spent millennia refining existing technologies, humans had been busy inventing entirely new ways to wage war. Deployment status of our regular fleet? 17 battleships ready for immediate action, 43 cruisers, and over 200 smaller vessels. Marine complement at 98% readiness. All units are equipped with the latest adaptive armor and weapon systems. Chen turned to Martinez. Intelligence assessment of Zephyrian defensive capabilities? Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons and projectile impacts, Martinez replied. Standard galactic technology. They've never encountered anything like what our research teams have developed. Good. Chun studied the star charts showing Zephyrian territory, dozens of systems, hundreds of worlds, billions of beings who had never known what it meant to face a truly angry human. We'll start with their forward bases. Hit them hard and fast before they realize what kind of enemy they're actually facing. She turned to address the entire room, her voice carrying the authority of a species that had never learned to surrender. The Zephyrians wanted to test human resolve. They killed 7,000 of our people to see how we would respond. Today, they get their answer. Today, they learn that when you target human families, you don't get a political response. You get a species response. You get 3 million years of accumulated survival instinct focused on a single objective: eliminating the threat. The tactical displays around the room suddenly blazed with activity as fleet movements accelerated across human space. Ships that had been scattered across dozens of systems were converging on rally points. Supply convoys were being rerouted to support combat operations. Research facilities were uploading their latest developments directly to frontline units. Shen watched it all with satisfaction. The galaxy's other species might have larger fleets or more advanced technology, but they had never needed to develop what humans had perfected over millennia: the ability to coordinate massive, complex operations under extreme pressure while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. "Ma'am," Torres called out. "Priority transmission from the Terran Embassy on Kepler Station. Ambassador Williams reports that the Galactic Council is demanding an immediate audience. They want assurances that humanity won't take any precipitous action." Shin looked at the message, then at the tactical displays showing her forces moving into position for humanity's response to the Proxima Massacre. "Send a reply to Ambassador Williams," she said. "Tell him to inform the Council that humanity's response will be entirely proportional to the threat we face. Then, tell him to evacuate all non-essential personnel from the embassy immediately." "Mom." "The Council chamber is about to become a very dangerous place for humans," Chin explained. "When they realize what proportional response means to a species that survived the predators of Earth, some of them are going to panic. I want our people safely away from that panic." She turned back to the window overlooking the holographic lake, where digital ducks swam in eternal circles, blissfully unaware that the species they represented was about to remind the galaxy why humans were the apex predators of their homeworld. The Zephyrians had wanted to send a message with the Proxima Massacre. They had succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. Earth's response was about to be delivered in a language the galaxy would never forget. Captain Marcus Webb felt the familiar vibration through the deck plates as the HSS Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. The Zephyrian forward operating base hung in space like a jeweled spider web, all crystalline beauty and deadly elegance. It was the first target on Admiral Chen's list, and Webb had volunteered his ship to deliver humanity's opening statement. "Contact bearing 097 Mark 12, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim from the sensor station. Zephyrian battle station, approximately 50,000 tons, defensive platforms." "Jesus Christ, Captain. They've got families down there." Webb moved to look at the sensor display, his jaw tightening as the data resolved. The base wasn't just military. It was a complete settlement with civilian quarters, schools, even what looked like recreational facilities. Children lived in that structure. Innocent beings who had nothing to do with the massacre on Proxima. For a moment, the bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. Webb could feel his crew's eyes on him, waiting to see what kind of man their captain would prove to be when faced with this choice. "Sir," Kim continued quietly, "the residential sections are clearly marked. We could target only the military installations, and no." Webb's voice was steady, but those who knew him could hear the pain underneath. "All sections. Complete destruction." The silence stretched longer this time. Webb knew what his crew was thinking because he was thinking the same thing. There would be children on that station. Innocent children who would die because of what their government had chosen to do. "Sir," Kim said again, her voice careful. "Are you certain? We could disable the base without." Webb turned to face his bridge crew, and they saw something in his eyes that made them understand exactly why Admiral Chun had chosen him for this mission. "Lieutenant Commander Kim, pull up the Proxima files. Show me the surveillance footage from the colony school." Kim's hands hesitated over her console, but she complied. The main viewer filled with images from the Proxima Centauri colony's elementary school in those final moments. Small bodies scattered among tiny desks. A teacher's aide who had died, trying to shield a group of 6-year-olds with her own body. Drawings that would never be finished, scattered across floors, painted with blood. That's what proportional response means, Webb said quietly. They killed our children while they slept. They made a choice about what kind of war they wanted to fight. Now, they live with the consequences of that choice. He turned back to the tactical display, his voice becoming crisp and professional. Mr. Patterson, target all sections of the base. I want complete vaporization, no debris large enough to contain survivors. Mr. Kim, scan for escape pods or evacuation shuttles. If anything launches from that station, destroy it immediately. Sir, Ensign Garcia spoke up from the communication station. We're receiving a transmission from the base. They're requesting terms for surrender. Webb looked at the young officer for a long moment. Garcia had joined the fleet right out of the academy, full of idealism about humanity's role in the galactic community. The massacre on Proxima had aged him 10 years in 10 days. What did they broadcast when they entered orbit around Proxima? Webb asked. Garcia checked his records. No communication at all, sir. They jumped in system and immediately began bombardment. Then, we'll give them the same courtesy they showed our people. No response. Mr. Patterson, fire when ready. The Retribution's main guns spoke with voices that had been tuned in the fires of human warfare. Not the elegant energy beams favored by galactic navies, but something nastier. Projectile weapons that delivered kinetic energy and exotic matter warheads designed by human physicists who understood that sometimes the most effective way to kill something was to hit it very hard with something very dense moving very fast. The first salvo struck the station's crystalline hull, and Webb watched with grim satisfaction as the exotic matter warheads did exactly what the weapons designers had promised. Instead of simply punching holes, they destabilized the molecular bonds holding the structure together. The beautiful crystal spires didn't explode. They simply ceased to exist, converted to their component atoms in brilliant flashes of released energy. Direct hits on all target sections, Patterson reported. Station structural integrity at 0%. No survivors detected. Webb nodded. The first message had been delivered. Now for the second part. Mr. Garcia, open a channel to all vessels in this system. Broadcast on all frequencies. Channel open, sir. Webb looked directly into the recording sensor, knowing his words would be transmitted throughout Zephyrian space within hours. This is Captain Marcus Webb of the Human Defense Force Vessel Retribution. We have just destroyed the Zephyrian military installation in this system in direct response to the unprovoked massacre of 7,000 human civilians on Proxima Centauri b. He paused, letting that statement register with whoever might be listening. Let me be clear about what has just happened here. The Zephyrian Empire chose to target human families. They chose to murder sleeping children. They chose to demonstrate their concept of proportional warfare. We are now demonstrating ours. Another pause. In the background, the bridge crew continued their work with professional efficiency, already preparing for the next target. To all Zephyrian military personnel, you are hereby advised that any vessel or installation participating in operations against human civilians will be destroyed without warning or opportunity for surrender. To all Zephyrian civilian populations, remove yourselves from military installations immediately. We do not wish to harm innocents, but we will not allow military targets to hide behind civilian shields. Webb gestured to cut the transmission, then turned to his navigation officer. Mr. Chun, set course for the Gliese 667C system. Maximum hyperspace velocity. And send a message to Admiral Harrison. Tell him the first target has been eliminated and we're moving to the second. As the Retribution prepared for its next jump, Webb walked to his ready room, where he could review the intelligence briefings in private. Each target on their list was a piece of the larger Zephyrian military infrastructure, but each also represented thousands of lives that would end because of the decisions made by their government. He pulled up the personnel files for his own crew, looking at faces that had become family over their 3 years of service together. Lieutenant Commander Kim, whose parents had died in the asteroid mining accident that made her determined to serve in space. Ensign Garcia, whose younger brother was currently attending the academy on Luna. Chief Patterson, whose daughter was the same age as many of the children killed on Proxima. These were good people who had signed up to protect human space from external threats. None of them had expected to be dropping kinetic hammers on alien daycare centers. But the Zephyrians had changed the rules of engagement when they decided to target civilians. A soft chime indicated an incoming message from Earth Command. Webb opened the secure channel and found Admiral Chen's face filling his screen. Captain Webb, excellent work on the first target. I trust your crew is handling the mission parameters appropriately. Yes, ma'am. They understand what's at stake. Webb paused. Admiral, I have to ask, are we certain this is the only way? The intelligence suggests that many of these installations have significant civilian populations. Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of the same pain Webb felt every time he looked at the target list. Captain, 3 hours ago, we intercepted Zephyrian military communications. They're planning coordinated strikes against 6 more human colonies over the next 2 weeks. They specifically discussed targeting schools and hospitals to maximize psychological impact on the primitive human population. Webb felt something cold settle in his stomach. They're planning more massacres. They're planning systematic genocide, Captain. They want to break human morale by demonstrating that we can't protect our families. They think if they kill enough civilians, we'll surrender our colonies and retreat to Earth rather than watch our children die. Chen leaned forward slightly, her voice becoming even more intense. What they don't understand is that threatening our children doesn't make us surrender. It makes us dangerous in ways they can't imagine. Every human military officer, every scientist, every engineer, every citizen is now working toward a single objective, making sure the Zephyrian Empire never threatens human families again. Webb nodded slowly. What about the Galactic Council? Are they still demanding we follow standard engagement protocols? Chen's laugh was sharp and bitter. The Council wants us to file formal complaints and request mediation. They want us to spend months in committee hearings while the Zephyrians systematically murder every human colony outside the Sol system. They think this is a political problem that can be solved with diplomatic solutions. And our response to that, Captain, is to show them what happens when you treat an existential threat as a political inconvenience. We're operating under human rules now, not galactic ones. The Council can debate proportional response while we prevent a genocide. The connection closed, leaving Webb alone with his thoughts and the weight of what they were about to do. He understood the logic. Every Zephyrian military installation they destroyed now was one less launch platform for attacks on human civilians. Every enemy ship they eliminated was one less weapon aimed at human children. But understanding the logic didn't make it easier to live with the consequences. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Come in. Lieutenant Commander Kim entered, carrying a datapad and an expression of carefully controlled concern. Sir, I've been analyzing the Zephyrian response patterns from the first strike. They're recalling ships from across their territory and consolidating around their core systems. Webb studied the tactical projections Kim had prepared. The Zephyrian fleet was indeed pulling back, abandoning forward positions to protect their homeworlds. They think we're going to invade, he realized. They're preparing for a conventional fleet action. Kim nodded, which means they still don't understand what they're dealing with. They think this is a standard territorial dispute that will be resolved through traditional naval warfare. Webb looked at the deployment patterns again, seeing opportunity where the Zephyrians saw prudent defense. They're concentrating their forces to protect static targets. That makes them predictable. He activated his command console and began composing new targeting priorities. And predictable enemies are vulnerable enemies. Sir, Webb turned to face Kim, and she saw the same cold determination in his eyes that Admiral Chun had shown in her war room deep beneath Geneva. Signal the rest of the task force. We're changing tactics. Instead of hitting isolated installations, we're going after their fleet concentration points. Let's see how well their beautiful crystal ships stand up to human ingenuity when they're packed together in defensive formations. Kim's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Sir, that would mean engaging their entire battle fleet simultaneously. The odds are exactly what they always are when humans face existential threats, Webb interrupted. Either we find a way to win, or we die trying. There's no third option when someone threatens our families. He stood and moved toward the bridge, Kim following close behind. Besides, Webb added with the first genuine smile he'd shown since learning about Proxima, the Zephyrians are about to discover something that every predator on Earth learned the hard way. Humans aren't particularly impressive as individuals. But when we hunt as a pack, when we coordinate our attacks, when we use our intelligence to overcome superior force. He stepped onto the bridge, where his crew was already preparing for the next jump. Well, let's just say there's a reason humans are the only species on Earth that hunt for sport. And the Zephyrians just made this very, very personal. The retribution disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it humanity's promise that the massacre on Proxima would not go unanswered. Behind them, the debris field that had once been a Zephyrian base continued to expand into the vacuum, a monument to the price of awakening something that had been sleeping peacefully among the stars. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had not conquered Earth through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had done it through superior tactics, unbreakable determination, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat when their survival was at stake. The Zephyrians had wanted to test human resolve. They were about to discover that some tests have only one possible result: the complete destruction of whoever was foolish enough to administer them. Fleet Admiral Harrison stood in the command center of the HSS Nemesis, humanity's first true warship designed specifically to fight aliens rather than other humans. Through the armored viewport, he watched the rest of Task Force Omega maintain perfect formation as they approached the Zephyrian home system of Zalthara Prime. 27 human ships against the combined might of the Zephyrian Imperial fleet. On paper, it should have been suicide. But humans had stopped paying attention to what looked good on paper around the time they decided to hunt creatures 10 times their size with nothing but sharp sticks and tactical thinking. Admiral, Commander Rodriguez called from the sensor station. We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. It looks like they positioned their entire fleet in a defensive shell around their homeworld. Harrison moved to the tactical display, studying the enemy formations with the eye of someone who had spent 40 years learning how to kill things that didn't want to die. The Zephyrians had arranged their ships in elegant, overlapping defensive layers, a thing of beauty that would have made military historians write poetry about the mathematical precision of their spacing. It was also exactly what Harrison had hoped they would do. How many ships total? He asked. Sensor count indicates approximately 400 Zephyrian vessels of all classes, Rodriguez replied, including at least 60 dreadnoughts and their entire Imperial battle fleet. From any other species in the galaxy, that would have been a statement of overwhelming force. From humans, it was merely an observation about target density. Excellent, Harrison said with satisfaction. Signal all ships. Execute Plan Omega on my mark. And patch me through to Admiral Chun on Earth. She'll want to observe this personally. The main screen flickered, showing Admiral Chun in her war room, surrounded by staff officers whose faces reflected the same grim determination that had driven human military planning for the past weeks. Admiral Harrison, Chun said without preamble, status report. We're in position above Zalthara Prime, Harrison replied. Enemy fleet deployed in standard defensive formation, approximately 400 ships. We're ready to demonstrate why human military doctrine emphasizes adaptation over tradition. Chun nodded. The Galactic Council is monitoring this engagement through their own sensors. Ambassador Williams reports they're expecting a conventional fleet action that will result in the destruction of human forces and the end of our aggressive response to Proxima. Harrison's smile was sharp enough to cut crystal. Then, they're about to learn that human military thinking evolved under somewhat different pressures than galactic standard doctrine. He turned to his bridge crew, all of whom had volunteered for this mission, knowing they would be facing impossible odds with untested weapons and tactics that existed only in the fevered imaginations of human military scientists. Gentlemen and ladies, today we answer a question that has been debated since humanity first reached the stars. What happens when human military innovation meets traditional galactic warfare? The Zephyrians believe they understand conflict because they've studied the same tactical manuals and strategic philosophies as every other species in their region of space. He gestured toward the tactical display, showing the beautiful, precise formations of enemy ships. What they don't understand is that human military doctrine was forged fighting creatures that were faster, stronger, and better armed than we were. We learned to win through superior planning, adaptive tactics, and the willingness to try solutions that other species would consider impossibly reckless. Harrison activated the ship's general communication system, addressing not just his own crew, but every human serving in Task Force Omega. All ships, this is Admiral Harrison. In approximately 10 minutes, we're going to engage a force 20 times our size using weapons and tactics that have never been tested in actual combat. By every traditional measure of military analysis, we should be destroyed within the first 5 minutes. He paused, letting that sink in across the human fleet. However, tradition has never been humanity's strong suit. We're the species that decided to hunt mammoths by running them off cliffs. We're the species that conquered the oceans in wooden boats. We're the species that reached the stars by strapping ourselves to controlled explosions and hoping our mathematics were correct. On the tactical display, the first phase of Plan Omega began as human ships started moving in patterns that would look completely random to any observer familiar with standard fleet tactics. Today, we remind the galaxy that human military innovation comes from 3 million years of refusing to accept that impossible means anything other than hasn't been tried yet. Execute Plan Omega. All ships, weapons free. What happened next would be studied in military academies throughout the galaxy for centuries afterward, though most analysts would never quite understand how 27 human ships managed to defeat 400 Zephyrian vessels in less than 18 minutes. The first surprise came when the human ships didn't attack the Zephyrian fleet at all. Instead, they targeted the space around the enemy formation, firing what appeared to be some kind of exotic matter projectiles that simply disappeared upon impact with empty vacuum. Harrison, Admiral Chen's voice came through the comm with carefully controlled confusion. Our sensors aren't detecting any weapons impact. What are you targeting? Space-time itself, Harrison replied calmly, watching as his weapons officers continued their seemingly impossible task of shooting at nothing. The Zephyrians are familiar with energy weapons, kinetic weapons, even some basic gravity manipulation. What they've never encountered is weapons that attack the fundamental structure of reality. On the tactical display, the areas where human projectiles had struck began showing strange distortions. The elegant formations of Zephyrian ships suddenly found themselves dealing with gravity wells that hadn't existed moments before, spatial anomalies that bent their sensor readings into nonsense, and pockets of space where the normal laws of physics had been temporarily suspended. What in God's name did your scientists build? Chun asked, watching as Zephyrian ships began colliding with each other as their navigation systems failed to compensate for the altered space-time around them. Remember the Manhattan Project? Harrison asked, when human physicists decided to split atoms because they needed a bigger explosion. Well, our physicists decided that conventional weapons weren't thinking big enough. Why shoot at ships when you can shoot at the universe they're flying through? The Zephyrian fleet was beginning to respond, trying to adapt their formations to the new tactical environment. Their commanders were excellent tacticians, trained in academies that had produced victories for thousands of years. They began implementing countermeasures that should have neutralized the human advantage. That's when the second phase of Plan Omega began. All ships, Harrison commanded, execute Phase 2. Show them what happens when human engineers get creative. The human vessels suddenly began changing. What had looked like conventional warships started unfolding like mechanical flowers, revealing secondary hulls, hidden weapon systems, and configurations that transformed each ship from a single unit into a multi-component weapons platform. Modular ship design, Harrison explained to the watching Admiral Chun. Why build one big ship when you can build one ship that becomes 5 smaller ships when the tactical situation requires it? The Zephyrians planned their defense against 27 human vessels. They're now facing 135 independently maneuvering combat units. But even that wasn't the worst surprise waiting for the Zephyrian fleet. The real shock came when the human ships began coordinating their attacks with a precision that exceeded anything in galactic military history. Each vessel moved as part of a larger organism, sharing sensor data, coordinating targeting solutions, and adapting tactics in real time based on collective analysis of enemy responses. How are they coordinating so precisely? Chun asked, watching as human ships flowed around Zephyrian defenses like water, finding every crack in a dam. Quantum entanglement communication, Harrison replied. Every ship in the task force shares real-time awareness with every other ship. We're not fighting as individual vessels. We're fighting as a single distributed intelligence with 135 bodies. The Zephyrian fleet was beginning to crumble under the assault of tactics they couldn't understand and weapons that attacked the basic structure of reality around them. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries found themselves unable to maintain formation, unable to target enemies that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, unable to coordinate responses to attacks that came from directions that shouldn't exist. Phase 3, Harrison announced. Finish it. The final phase of Plan Omega revealed the true extent of human creativity when applied to the problem of killing things efficiently. Instead of continuing to attack the Zephyrian fleet directly, human ships began targeting the star itself. Not to destroy it. Even human engineers weren't quite ready to commit casual stellar genocide. Instead, they began modifying its output, using exotic matter weapons to adjust the fusion reactions in ways that created massive solar flares aimed directly at the enemy fleet. Harrison, Chen's voice was filled with a mixture of admiration and Are you using their own star as a weapon? When you're outnumbered 20-1, Harrison replied, watching as Zephyrian ships scrambled to deal with a solar storm that was literally reaching out to swat them from space. You use every available resource. The star was already there. We just gave it some encouragement to participate in the engagement. The battle ended 17 minutes and 37 seconds after it began. The Zephyrian Imperial fleet, pride of an empire that had dominated its region of space for millennia, had been reduced to scattered debris and crippled hulks drifting helplessly through a star system that no longer obeyed the normal laws of physics. All Zephyrian vessels. Harrison broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Harrison of the Human Defense Forces. Your fleet has been neutralized. Any ship that attempts to flee this system will be destroyed. Any ship that powers weapons will be destroyed. You have 5 minutes to evacuate to your home world before we begin the final phase of operations. He switched to a private channel with Admiral Chun. Sarah, we've just demonstrated human military capability to the entire galaxy. Every species monitoring this engagement now knows that we're not just another member of the galactic community. We're something completely different. Chun nodded slowly. The Council is requesting immediate communication. They want to discuss terms for ending hostilities. What kind of terms? The kind that treat humanity as an equal partner rather than a junior member who should know their place. Chen's expression was grim, but satisfied. It's amazing how quickly diplomatic attitudes change when they realize you're capable of turning their entire fleet into scrap metal using weapons they can't understand or counter. Harrison looked at the tactical display, where rescue pods were beginning to launch from the crippled Zephyrian ships. Soon those survivors would return to their home world with stories about human capabilities that would seem like impossible nightmares to beings who thought they understood the nature of warfare. "Admiral," Commander Rodriguez called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian government. Emperor Velthanes is requesting immediate negotiation of a ceasefire." Harrison considered this for a moment. The Zephyrian Emperor who had authorized the massacre of sleeping children on Proxima now wanted to talk about ending the war his forces had started. "Signal the Emperor," Harrison decided. "Tell him we'll consider negotiations after we've completed our current objective." "Which is?" Harrison smiled, and the expression held all the warmth of interstellar space. "Making sure every species in the galaxy understands that humans are no longer interested in being anyone's victims. The Zephyrians will serve as an excellent example of what happens to civilizations that think human families make acceptable targets." He turned to his weapons officer. "Prepare Phase 4 weapons. Target all major military installations on Zalthara Prime." The Emperor wanted to see how humans respond to attacks on our children. Let's show him exactly what that response looks like. The HSS Nemesis and its task force began the final demonstration of human military doctrine. When someone threatens your family, you don't just defeat them. You make sure they never have the capability to threaten anyone ever again. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity began rewriting the rules of interstellar warfare using the same innovative thinking that had once turned stone axes into nuclear weapons. The message was clear. Earth's children were under the protection of species that had never learned to accept defeat and had just figured out how to make stars themselves into weapons. The Proxima Massacre had been answered. The bill had come due, and humanity was collecting payment with interest calculated over 3 million years of survival against impossible odds. 6 months after the Battle of Zalthara Prime, Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Kepler Station. The ornate hall, designed to inspire awe and respect for galactic civilization, now felt more like a courtroom where humanity stood accused of crimes against the established order. But the humans were no longer the defendants. Ambassador Veltar of the hegemony, his crystalline features reflecting the stress fractures that had appeared throughout galactic politics since humanity's demonstration of military capability, spoke with carefully controlled diplomatic language that barely concealed his species' fear. "Admiral Chun," he began, his voice carrying the formal tones reserved for addressing dangerous equals. "The Council appreciates humanity's response to the Proxima incident. However, the level of destruction visited upon Zephyrian territory has raised concerns about proportional." "Ambassador," Chun interrupted, her voice cutting through the chamber's acoustics with the precision of a weapon designed to end arguments permanently. "Let's dispense with the diplomatic pleasantries. You called this hearing because you're terrified that what we did to the Zephyrians could be done to any of you." The silence that followed her words was absolute. Representatives of a dozen species, beings who had spent centuries managing galactic politics through careful negotiation and power balances, suddenly found themselves confronting a reality they had never prepared for. Humans didn't play by their rules. Chun activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber, showing the current state of what had once been the Zephyrian Empire. Where there had been dozens of star systems under Imperial control, there were now significantly fewer. "The Zephyrian Empire no longer exists as a galactic power," she announced with the clinical detachment of someone reading a weather report. "Their military capability has been reduced to 0. Their government has been restructured under human oversight. Their ability to threaten civilian populations anywhere in the galaxy has been permanently eliminated." She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives who had once treated humanity as a useful but junior partner in galactic affairs. This was accomplished in 6 months using conventional military force, advanced human technology, and tactical doctrines that your military analysts are still trying to understand. No weapons of mass destruction were employed. No civilian populations were deliberately targeted. No planets were rendered uninhabitable. Ambassador Catherine of the Altarian Republic, whose species had allied with the Zephyrians in previous conflicts, spoke with the careful tone of someone walking through a minefield. Admiral, while we acknowledge that the Proxima incident was regrettable, the scale of humanity's response has destabilized the entire sector. Refugee populations are fleeing Zephyrian space, trade routes have been disrupted, and several governments are requesting military protection against potential human aggression. Chin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere of the chamber. When humans had first joined the galactic community, they had been eager to fit in, to follow established protocols, to be accepted as civilized beings worthy of respect. That humanity was gone, burned away in the fires that had consumed 7,000 civilians on Proxima Centauri B. Ambassador Catherine, Chun said, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining simple concepts to a particularly slow student. Let me help you understand something about human military doctrine that seems to have escaped galactic attention. She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show the location of every human colony throughout known space. Dozens of worlds, hundreds of stations, millions of human families spread across the galaxy under the protection of the Human Defense Forces. When the Zephyrians targeted Proxima, they weren't attacking a military installation. They weren't attempting to capture territory or gain strategic advantage. They were sending a message that human families were acceptable targets for murder when political convenience demanded it. The display changed again, showing the response patterns of various galactic governments to the Proxima Massacre. Trade continued. Diplomatic relationships remained unchanged. Life went on as if 7,000 human deaths were simply the cost of doing business in civilized space. The galactic response to that message was to offer thoughts and prayers while suggesting that humanity should pursue diplomatic solutions. You treated the systematic murder of our children as a political inconvenience that could be managed through committee hearings and economic sanctions. Chun stepped closer to the assembled representatives, and several of them involuntarily moved backward. There was something in her presence now that reminded primitive brain stems that humans were predators who had earned their place at the top of Earth's food chain through violence. What you fail to understand is that humans don't treat threats to our families as political problems. We treat them as existential threats requiring immediate and permanent solution. The Zephyrian Empire chose to make human children acceptable targets. They're now extinct as a political entity. Ambassador Veltar attempted to regain control of the proceedings. Admiral, surely you understand that such decisive action sets a dangerous precedent. If every species responded to aggression with total warfare, but every species doesn't, Chen interrupted. Only humans do, because only humans evolved on a planet where failure to eliminate existential threats meant extinction. Your species developed in environments where negotiation and compromise were survival strategies. Humanity developed in an environment where the only survival strategy was killing anything that threatened your offspring. She activated another display, this one showing current fleet positions throughout human space. The assembled representatives could see warships stationed at every major trade route, sensor networks that monitored every vessel entering human territory, and defensive installations that made even approach to human worlds an exercise in crossing through kill zones designed by engineers who understood that the best defense was making attack impossible. Let me be very clear about the new reality. Chun continued. Humanity is no longer interested in being good galactic citizens who follow rules designed by species that have never faced real existential pressure. We are apex predators who have been playing nice for 3 centuries. The Proxima Massacre ended that experiment in civilized behavior. The chamber's environmental systems struggled to maintain proper atmospheric circulation as the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Representatives who had spent their careers managing interstellar politics suddenly found themselves wondering whether their own governments might have made decisions that could be interpreted as threats to human interests. Admiral, Ambassador Melthara of the Centaurian Federation spoke with the desperation of someone trying to prevent a catastrophe, What assurances can you provide that humanity's military capabilities will not be used against other galactic governments? Chen smiled, and the expression held about as much warmth as the vacuum between stars. The same assurances the galaxy provided us when we asked for protection against Zephyrian aggression. The same assurances our children received when they went to sleep on Proxima Centauri b. She paused, letting that sink in. However, I can offer you something better than diplomatic assurances. I can offer you the simple, observable fact that humans have no interest in conquest, territorial expansion, or forcing our values on unwilling populations. What we have is a very specific interest in ensuring that no galactic government ever again mistakes human families for acceptable targets. The holographic display changed one final time, showing a star map of known space divided into clear zones of influence and protection. As of today, humanity is withdrawing from active participation in galactic politics. We will honor existing trade agreements and maintain diplomatic relationships with governments that respect human territorial sovereignty. But we will no longer pretend that galactic law provides adequate protection for human interests. Chun turned to address the entire chamber, her voice carrying the authority of a species that had just proven it could rewrite the fundamental rules of interstellar warfare. The human defense forces now operate under a very simple doctrine. Any government, organization, or individual that targets human civilian populations will be eliminated. Not defeated, not contained, not negotiated with. Eliminated. Completely and permanently. She gestured toward the areas of space that had once belonged to the Zephyrian Empire. As the former Zephyrian Empire learned, humans are extremely good at elimination when we put our minds to it. 3 million years of evolution on a death world populated by things that wanted to eat us have made us very effective at solving existential threat problems. Ambassador Veltar made one final attempt at diplomatic resolution. Admiral, surely there must be some framework for managing disputes that doesn't require the complete destruction of opposing governments. Chen looked at him with something approaching pity. Ambassador, the framework you're looking for already existed. It was called galactic law, and it failed completely when tested against real aggression. The Zephyrians murdered 7,000 human civilians, and the galactic response was to schedule committee meetings to discuss appropriate responses. She turned to leave, then paused at the chamber's entrance. However, I can offer you a new framework that has proven extremely effective. Don't threaten human families. It's a simple rule with simple consequences. Follow it, and humanity will be the peaceful, cooperative neighbor we've been for 3 centuries. Violate it, and discover why humans are the only species in the galaxy with a military doctrine based on the complete elimination of existential threats. Shin walked out of the chamber, leaving behind representatives who suddenly understood that the galactic balance of power had shifted in ways their political models had never anticipated. Humanity wasn't seeking dominance or expansion. They were offering a choice between peaceful coexistence and extinction. 6 months later, Ambassador Williams would report that applications for trade agreements with human colonies had increased by 400%, while territorial disputes involving human space had dropped to 0. It seemed that the galaxy had discovered a remarkable capacity for respecting human territorial sovereignty once they understood the alternative. The Proxima Massacre had killed 7,000 human civilians. The response had eliminated an entire galactic empire and established humanity as a power that other species chose to respect rather than risk testing. Emperor Velthanes of the former Zephyrian Empire, now serving as planetary administrator for Zalthara Prime under human oversight, would later write in his memoirs, "We thought we were hunting sheep and discovered we had awakened wolves." The universe is filled with civilized species that have forgotten what it means to fight for survival. Humans never forgot. We learned this lesson at the cost of everything our civilization had built across 10,000 years of expansion. But on Earth, in a small cemetery outside Geneva, 7,000 new graves held the remains of humans who had died far from home, simply because they had chosen to build lives among the stars. Their names were engraved on a memorial that bore a simple inscription: "They were our children." The galaxy forgot that humans protect our children. The galaxy learned. Admiral Sarah Chun visited that memorial every month for the rest of her life, standing among the graves of families who had trusted humanity's leaders to keep them safe. She never spoke during these visits, but observers noted that she always carried herself with the bearing of someone who had kept a promise made to the dead. The galaxy had learned that human families were not acceptable targets. The price of that education had been measured in the complete destruction of everyone who had needed the lesson. Other species might call it disproportionate. Humans called it justice. And, in the end, no one disputed humanity's right to define justice for their own kind. The alternative had proven too expensive for anyone to consider testing twice.